Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. This week, I wanted to have a bit of a conversation about jurisdiction and accountability. And that's a really big thing right now because we're talking a lot about things where different levels of government should be responsible for different things as we are dealing with the pandemic. Case in point is, for example, commercial rent subsidy. This is a federal program, but rent is actually provincial jurisdiction. So it was one of those areas where the federal government put up money through the mechanism it had available, which is the CMHC, but it was the provinces who really signed off on the details of this. And now that the program has pretty much reached its conclusion, everyone is asking, well, why isn't the federal government doing more? When we should also be asking, why aren't the premiers doing more? Because this is their wheelhouse. Another example is with the disability payments that the federal government promised. But again, this is an area where it's normally provincial jurisdiction, so the federal government doesn't have any particular kind of database where they have people with disabilities at their disposal. So they're having to use the federal disability tax credit along with some of the information they have at, for example, Veterans Affairs, and trying to make them match up. And that takes a long time, and that's causing delays, and people are asking, well, why, kind of asking why the federal government's taking so long. But it's also, this is again an area where the provinces should be taking the lead, and they haven't been. And the other real example of that has been with testing. The Conservatives in particular are trying to put forward this narrative that the federal government hasn't approved enough rapid tests, therefore they're responsible for the huge backlogs that we're seeing in testing. And that is really not the case. The backlogs are largely because the provincial governments didn't invest in increasing lab capacity when they had the time available. And they had the money available. The federal government transferred them billions of dollars in order to do this, and they didn't spend it and didn't get it done. So while they're trying to blame the federal government for this, even though it's not really a government decision on the rapid tests, that's the federal regulator at Health Canada, and they have concerns that some of the rapid tests have a high degree of false negatives, which is a bad thing in a pandemic. But meanwhile, it's the provincial governments, particularly Ontario, as well as Quebec, Alberta as well, who did not invest in increasing their lab capacity. And so when cases started to rise again, we are now seeing the issue that we have now in terms of backlogs. And one of the reasons why I've been really kind of exercised about this in the last week or two is because accountability is important. That's one of the whole reasons why our system works the way it does, is so that we know who to hold to account and basically who we can punish when the time comes, particularly at an election. And one of my biggest concerns is that if everyone is trying to put all the blame on the federal government, which they have been, it's kind of giving the premiers a bit of a free pass, even though they're the ones who weren't doing the stuff that they're supposed to be doing in their own jurisdiction. And I find that to be a bit of a problem because this is their responsibility. And if we're not holding them to account for what is their responsibility, it's, then what is basically the point? And that's one of the things I think we need to think a lot about in the coming weeks, possibly months, as we are careening into the second wave, and probably lockdowns again. Quebec has already largely started them in Quebec City and Montreal, and therefore when things are starting to reach this kind of situation again, we should be really considering who it is who's responsible. And in 95% of what's going on, it's the provinces. Provinces did not invest in increasing lab capacity. Provinces did not deal with getting school restarted properly, which especially means smaller class sizes, and pretty much every provincial government has not gone ahead and done that. Hospital capacity, bringing in and training more healthcare workers, things like that, it's all provincial responsibility. The federal government has been shoveling money out the door at them in order to help them with this. We're wondering where it's being spent, and this is one of the other problems with that, is when you have people, particularly the Bloc and now the Conservatives, demanding that the federal government just hand over even more health transfers to provinces with no strings attached. And now we're seeing, for example, Ontario didn't spend that money to increase their lab capacity, so why should the federal government give them even more money without any kind of strings attached or guarantees that it's going to be spent on doing the necessary work like lab capacity and contact tracing and so on. So these are things that I'm hoping that we can all just kind of keep in mind. I really, really reject this notion that nobody cares about jurisdiction in a pandemic, because that's not how our Constitution is structured. There are clear delineations between what is provincial and what is federal jurisdiction, and sure, the federal government can help fund things, and they have been, but it's still, implementation is the province's responsibility. And those are the people who we need to be holding to account. They didn't really get the job done in the first wave. A lot of them thought they did, patted themselves on the back. People gave certain premiers glowing reviews for basically not melting down, even though their performance was terrible. And here we are now in the onset of a second wave. All the problems from the first wave were not resolved, and we're now it's now being compounded by the rapid rise in cases. So yeah, let's keep this in mind. The people who we really, really need to be holding to account here are the premiers. We need to stop giving them a free pass and letting them think that they did a good job, because they didn't. And it's their feet who we should be holding to the fire, especially when the next rounds of elections come around. And that is everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith, that's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.